I still remember the weight of that morning like it happened yesterday. The overcast sky hung low over New York City, casting a gray haze over the streets as our car pulled into the circular drive of Madison Elite High School. It wasn't just another school, it was the school, the kind of place where senators sent their children, where last names carried legacies, and where excellence was expected, not earned. I gripped the strap of my backpack tightly, my palms damp despite the cold. The leather seat beneath me felt like it was pushing me out, nudging me into a world I didn't belong to. The driver, a man I didn't know and would probably never see again, opened the door without a word. I stepped out, my polished shoes crunching on the gravel like I was breaking some unwritten rule. My name is Barron, and on that day, I wasn't Trump. I was just a kid trying to find a place to belong. Inside, the school smelled like old books and money. The marble floors were so clean, they reflected the chandeliers hanging high above. Students passed me in tailored uniforms, laughing softly, eyeing me like I was a transfer from another planet. And maybe I was. It wasn't the first time I'd walked into a room where people already had an opinion about me. But somehow, this felt different, colder, like their smiles had thorns. I followed the directions I had scribbled in my notebook, trying to find the music room. Music was the only thing that made sense to me. It wasn't politics. It wasn't power. It was honest, pure. I didn't need to explain myself when I was playing. I just needed a piano. But even that felt distant now. Are you the new student, Barron Trump? The voice stopped me in my tracks. It was sharp, precise, like a conductor's baton slicing through silence. I turned and saw her, Ms. Harrison. She stood tall, arms crossed, her graying hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked like it hurt. Her eyes scanned me up and down with thinly veiled skepticism. Yes, ma'am, I said, trying to keep my tone respectful. She didn't offer a smile. Follow me. I run a discipline class, Mr. Trump. I hope you're ready for that. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked briskly down the hall. I hurried to keep up, my backpack bouncing lightly against my back. When we entered the music room, it was like stepping into a different world. Rows of students sat with perfect posture, their sheet music aligned precisely on their desks. The instruments gleamed under the recessed lighting. Everything about the room whispered order, tradition, and excellence. Everyone stopped to look at me. And in that moment, I realized I was the only student of color in the room. The silence was uncomfortable. Not overtly hostile, but heavy, judging. Ms. Harrison didn't introduce me. She didn't explain who I was or why I was there. Instead, she walked in front of the room and began class as if I were invisible. Today, she announced, we discussed the role of discipline in classical music. Not everyone is fortunate enough to grow up appreciating refinement, but here, we teach true artistry. Several students chuckled softly. I felt the sting of her words, veiled just enough to be deniable, yet targeted enough to be unmistakable. I sat in the back, alone, pretending not to notice that no one had placed music sheets on my desk. I raised my hand. Ms. Harrison, I didn't receive the... Perhaps it would be better if you observed today, she said curtly. We'll see if you can keep up. The chuckles grew louder this time. I lowered my hand, heart pounding, heat rising to my cheeks. I wanted to disappear into the floor, but I kept my head down, breathing slow and steady. I wasn't new to being judged, but this was different. This wasn't curiosity or fascination. This was dismissal. When the class ended, I stayed in my seat a little longer, waiting for the others to leave. My fingers itched for piano keys, not for attention, but because I needed it, like air. But I wasn't invited. Not yet. Outside the room, I heard my name being whispered. Some students looked back at me and smirked. One girl, not unkindly, offered a small smile, but said nothing. Back in the hallway, I leaned against the wall, staring down at the linoleum tiles. I pulled out my worn notebook, the one filled with half-finished melodies, sketches of emotions turned into sound. It was the only thing that felt like mine. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling of my room. The city lights filtered through curtains and distant car horns echoed like the heartbeat of the world I was now part of, but not yet accepted by. I wondered if I had made a mistake, if I didn't belong here after all. But even in the quiet, I felt something stirring. Not anger, not fear, something deeper, determination. I hadn't come here to prove I was a Trump. I had come to prove I was me, and something told me this was just the beginning. What none of them knew, not even Ms. Harrison, was that I had been preparing for this moment my entire life. And very soon, they would all hear what silence could become when given a voice. This story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful voices come from the quietest places. Have you ever felt underestimated, like no one believed in you? Share your story in the comments. Tell us your name and city. We'd love to give you a special shout out in the next video. And if you believe in second chances and powerful comebacks, be part of this community. Subscribe now and join us as we tell more stories that matter. If this chapter touched your heart, give a like and share it with someone who needs this message today. The second day at Madison Elite felt colder than the first, not because of the weather, but because of the silence. Silence from the students who walked past me without a glance. Silence from Ms. Harrison, who didn't so much as acknowledge me when I walked into her classroom. Silence from the room itself, polished and pristine, as if I were an intruder bringing in noise where there should be order. I sat at the same seat in the back, the one Ms. Harrison had pointed to like an afterthought. My notebook was open in front of me, a pencil resting in the spiral. I had written down a melody the night before, something soft, something aching, but I couldn't bring myself to hear in my head anymore. Ms. Harrison handed out new sheet music to class. She moved down the aisles, complimenting a few students by name. "Well done, Natalie. That's the finger positioning I like to see. Excellent preparation, Lucas. You've clearly been practicing." She passed my desk without a word, without placing the sheet music in front of me. I waited. Maybe she'd turn around. Maybe it was an oversight, but she kept walking. I raised my hand. "Excuse me, Ms. Harrison. I didn't get..." Her voice sliced through the room before I could finish. "Barron, let's take this one step at a time. You should observe for now. There's a lot to learn before one begins to contribute." Laughter rippled through the rows. I swallowed hard and nodded slowly, my hand dropping back to the desk. It wasn't just humiliation. It was targeted, precise, controlled. She didn't want me to learn. She wanted me to leave. The rest of the class rehearsed a passage from Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. I knew it by heart. I could have played it blindfolded with one hand, but I sat there, still and silent, while Ms. Harrison corrected wrong notes from other students and ignored me entirely. During lunch, I wandered outside and sat on a bench beneath a leafless tree. The wind tugged gently at my coat. I stared at the courtyard, at the small groups laughing together, at the perfect cliques that didn't need new members. I wasn't sure if it was me they hated or what I represented. That evening at home, I practiced in the music room alone. The piano there didn't judge. It didn't ask for my resume or my last name. It only asked for honesty, for feeling. I let my fingers glide over the keys, playing the melody from my notebook. I closed my eyes and imagined what it might sound like in front of an audience. Not one that applauded because of who I was, but because they heard me, because they felt something real. I played for hours, and no one interrupted. The rest of the week unfolded like a tightly wound clock, predictable in its cruelty. Ms. Harrison continued to ignore me during class. She praised others openly, offering small corrections, tips, encouragement. But for me, there was nothing, not a glance, not a word. When Friday arrived, she stood at the front of the classroom with her arms folded, her expression unreadable. "Today," she announced, "we'll be doing individual evaluations. I want to see what each of you has learned so far. This will help me understand your progress and your potential." Students buzzed with nervous excitement. Some fumbled through their sheet music. Others whispered song choices. I sat motionless, not sure if I was even included in the exercise. She began with Natalie, who played a graceful piece from Claire de Lune. Ms. Harrison nodded in approval, offering polite applause. Lucas went next, then Diana, then Joseph. When the room grew quiet again, her eyes turned to me. "Mr. Trump," she said, voice crisp, "why don't you show us what you know?" There it was. The setup, the trap. Her tone wasn't curious. It was condescending, dare me to try and fail. I could see it in the way some students leaned forward, their eyes shining with anticipation. Not for music, for drama. I hesitated. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. My mouth went dry. My hands felt like ice. But then, from somewhere deep inside, I felt something stir. That melody from my notebook, the one I had poured myself into, it was still there, waiting. I stood and walked to the piano. Ms. Harrison raised an eyebrow and stepped back. "Let's see what you've got." The room fell into silence. I sat down, placing my hands on the keys. The piano was warm under my fingers, like an old friend welcoming me home. I closed my eyes and began to play. At first, it was soft, barely a whisper, notes that trembled with uncertainty, like footsteps in the dark. But then, slowly I let go. The melody grew, swelled, became something alive. It carried my fear, my frustration, my longing. Every note was a word I hadn't been allowed to speak. Every chord a truth they didn't want to hear. I didn't play for them. I played despite them. When I finished, the room was frozen. No claps, no laughter, just silence. But it wasn't the cold silence from before. This one was different. Thick, charged, unmistakable. Ms. Harrison blinked. Her lips parted slightly as if to speak. But no words came. And for the first time, I looked her in the eye. She tried to ignore me before. But now, she would have to decide whether to silence the music or acknowledge what she could no longer deny. The following days felt like an echo of the moment I played in front of class. The silence wasn't gone, but something had shifted. The students, who once looked at me like a curiosity, now avoided my gaze. The room still felt cold, but it wasn't because of me. No, it was because of them. The weight of Miss Harrison's unspoken judgment hung heavily in the air, thicker than any formal reprimand. I could see the way her eyes lingered on me after that performance. Part disbelief, part something else. Something darker. She didn't speak to me after class. No encouragement. No critique. Nothing. Just silence. But as the days went on, I realized that silence was a double-edged sword. It wasn't just about her ignoring me anymore. It was about the room, the space, the students around me. They were still talking, still laughing, but there was no warmth in it now. The undercurrent of tension simmered, and I could feel it creeping into my own thoughts, my own doubts. Was I really good enough to be here? That Friday, we were given a new assignment. Tchaikovsky, a piece from the Nutcracker. I'd heard it before. It was simple, charming. But as I looked around the room, I couldn't help but feel a gnawing unease. I knew it wouldn't matter how well I played. Ms. Harrison made it clear who was expected to shine and who was expected to fade into the background. I had already made my place in the shadows. At the start of class, she passed out the sheet music. Each student was to perform the piece they'd been assigned, with the goal of showing how they could interpret the music, bring something new to it. When it was my turn, I felt every pair of eyes on me, the same ones that had scrutinized me when I first stepped through those doors, the same eyes that were now judging every move I made. I sat at the piano, fingers poised above the keys, but my hands felt heavy. The weight of expectation crushed me before I could even begin. This wasn't about music anymore. It was about survival. I wasn't just playing the notes. I was playing for my place in this world, for my right to belong. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I played. I didn't know how much time passed as my fingers danced across the keys. It felt like I was playing in a dream, each note flowing more freely than the last. For a moment, I wasn't Barron Trump. I was just a kid at a piano, lost in the music. But when the last note echoed through the room, the silence that followed was deafening. The class waited, their gazes now heavy with judgment. Ms. Harrison's expression remained unreadable. She looked at me for a long time, then turned to the class. That's enough for today. And just like that, it was over. No feedback, no critique, just dismissal. I stood up slowly, trying not to let the sting of her words pierce me too deeply. The rest of the class filed out, some whispering among themselves, others with their heads held high. I gathered my things, but before I could leave, Ms. Harrison stopped me. "Barron," she said, her tone clipped. "Stay for a moment." I hesitated but nodded and turned to face her. She walked to the front of the room and leaned against the piano. "Listen, I know who you are. I know what you're capable of," she began, her words sharp but strangely reluctant. "But talent alone won't get you far here. This is about more than just playing well. It's about fitting in, about showing you belong." I stared at her, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. But I couldn't let her see how much they hurt. "I'm not here to fit in," I said quietly. "I'm here to be heard." She didn't reply, just gave a tight nod, almost like she was acknowledging something I couldn't understand. I left the room in silence, her words lingering in the back of my mind. As I walked through the halls, I noticed the stares, the whispers. They weren't as sharp as before, but they were there, silent, insidious. The rest of the week passed in much the same way. I played my pieces, sometimes nailing them, other times struggling. But with every note, I felt the distance between me and the others growing wider. It wasn't just about music. It was about everything. By Thursday, I had had enough. I couldn't keep pretending that this wasn't tearing me apart. So I decided to confront it. After class, I walked into Ms. Harrison's office. She was sitting at her desk, writing something in her notes, but when I stepped in, she looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Barron," she said, her tone more cautious than usual. "What is it?" I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment I had been dreading. "I don't need to belong here. I need to be heard. That's all I want. To play, to create. I don't care what you think of me, but I'll prove that I deserve to be here." My voice was steady, but the words were like a weight lifting off my chest. Ms. Harrison stared at me, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. "You'll need more than just words," she said finally. "But perhaps you might be worth the fight." And with that, she turned back to her work, signaling the end of our conversation. I walked out, unsure what just happened, but feeling the first spark of hope in days. Maybe I could prove her wrong. What Ms. Harrison didn't know was that I wasn't looking for approval. I was looking for something much more powerful, freedom. And soon, I'd show her what that really meant. If you've ever had to prove yourself when others doubted you, I'd love to hear your story. Share in the comments and let us know what it took for you to push through. If you believe that everyone deserves a chance to be heard, make sure to join this community. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of perseverance and triumph. And if this chapter inspired you, don't forget to like and share it with someone who needs a reminder that they too can rise above. The next week, I stepped into class with a quiet resolve. The kind of resolve that only comes after a conversation that stings just enough to force you to move forward. Ms. Harrison's words from the previous day had unsettled me, but they had also ignited something inside of me, a determination to prove that I wasn't just some name on a roster. I was a musician, a creator. I deserved to be here. The students, however, seemed unaware of my newfound resolve. They still whisper behind my back, still glance at me as if I were some anomaly. But now, I was beginning to realize that their looks didn't matter. What mattered was the music, the notes, the melodies that lived inside me and longed to be set free. Ms. Harrison, on the other hand, seemed determined to continue her silent treatment. Her coldness wasn't even subtle anymore. She barely acknowledged my presence. She didn't even look at me when she handed out the assignments. But as I glanced around, I saw something that surprised me. A few of the students were looking at me differently. There were no more smug smiles, no more condescending stares. Instead, there was a flicker of curiosity. They had heard me play that day. They had witnessed something they hadn't expected. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that their curiosity meant nothing if I didn't have the courage to follow through. If I didn't continue proving myself, week after week, note after note, I'd fall right back into that same trap. The trap of silence, of being forgotten. I needed to rise above. I needed to let my music speak louder than their doubts. It wasn't until Friday that things began to change. We were given a new assignment, a challenging piece from Brahms. The kind of peace that separated the good from the great. I knew this was my chance. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment to show them that I wasn't just here to fit in. I was here to shine. I practiced for hours that afternoon, my fingers moving across the keys with growing confidence. I closed my eyes as the music surrounded me, drowning out everything else. The world outside the practice room disappeared. There was only the music, and for the first time, I felt in control. The next day, Ms. Harrison called on me to perform in front of the class. The tension in the room was palpable as I walked to the front. I felt their eyes on me, their judgment, their expectations. But I couldn't let it get to me. I couldn't let it define me. I sat at the piano, feeling the familiar weight of the keys beneath my fingers. I took a deep breath and began to play. The first few notes were tentative, but soon I found my rhythm. The music flowed from me, each note a release. My body moved with the melody, my hands almost flying over the piano. I lost myself in the sound, in the feeling of being free. I wasn't just playing notes anymore. I was telling a story. My story. When I finished, the room was dead silent. I opened my eyes and saw that the students were staring at me, wide-eyed. Some had their mouths slightly open. Others were leaning forward in disbelief. But it wasn't just their expressions that caught my attention. It was Ms. Harrison's. For the first time, she didn't look at me with disdain. For the first time, I saw something else in her eyes, respect. But just as quickly, she composed herself, her face returning to its usual impassive expression. She nodded curtly. "Well done, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "But don't forget, music is not just about technique. It's about heart. And I wonder, Mr. Trump, if you're capable of bringing heart into your work." Her words stung more than I expected, but I didn't let it show. I stood up, nodded, and walked back to my seat. I wasn't looking for her approval. I wasn't looking for anyone's approval. I had done what I came to do. That night, as I walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. It wasn't just the music. It was the way I saw myself. I had spent so long trying to fit into a world that didn't seem to have a place for me. But now, I was starting to see that maybe the world I was trying to fit into wasn't the one that mattered. The music I created was mine, and no one could take that from me. The next week, the school held its annual recital. It was a big event, one that everyone attended, even the parents. I knew it was my time to show them what I could do. This was the moment that would define everything. I couldn't let fear control me. I couldn't let the past hold me back. When the day of the recital came, I stood backstage, my heart pounding in my chest. My fingers trembled slightly as I held the sheet music, but I knew it didn't matter. I had already shown them what I could do. This was about proving to myself that I was capable of more than I had ever believed. When it was my turn to perform, I stepped out onto the stage, facing the audience for the first time. The lights were bright, blinding. I could barely see the faces in the crowd, but I could feel them. All their eyes on me, all their expectations. I took a deep breath and sat down at the grand piano. The first notes were tentative, but as soon as my fingers hit the keys, the music began to take over. I felt every emotion I had ever experienced flow through me. Every doubt, every moment of uncertainty, every triumph. I poured my soul into the music, letting it take on a life of its own. When I finished, the audience sat in stunned silence. And then, to my surprise, the room erupted into applause. But as I stood there, hearing the applause, something inside me knew that this was only the beginning. I had proven something to them. But more importantly, I had proven something to myself. It's strange how quickly things can change. 1 minute, you're on top of the world, feeling like you've conquered something impossible. And the next, you're back at square one, grappling with a reality that doesn't look quite as welcoming anymore. The recital was the moment I'd been waiting for. It was supposed to be the point where everything clicked, where I'd finally prove that I belonged, that I wasn't just another face, another name. But as I sat in the back of the music room the following week, watching the other students perform, I felt a new weight pressing down on me. I hadn't expected to feel like this. The applause had been overwhelming, yes, but with it came something else, expectations. Suddenly, everyone around me looked at me differently. There was no more doubt about my abilities. But now, there was the pressure to live up to it, to deliver every time. The next assignment was looming. Ms. Harrison had announced a competition. Not just any competition. One that would determine who would play the solo in the school's upcoming concert. And as she looked across the room, I felt her gaze settle on me for the first time in weeks. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice piercing the air like a challenge. "You're the obvious choice for this performance. But remember, talent is just one part of the equation. The rest? That's up to you." I wasn't sure what she meant, but I knew it wasn't good. It was as if she wanted me to fail, to make one mistake, so she could prove a point. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted to tear me down, make me regret the very moment I'd walked into that room and played my heart out. It was a game, and I was the pawn. But I wasn't going to play by her rules. Not anymore. The pressure mounted, heavier than anything I'd ever felt before. Every day, I practiced more intensely, trying to perfect every note, every pause. The piece I was assigned was complex, but I wasn't worried about that. What worried me was the weight of everyone's eyes on me, the expectation to be perfect. By the time the day of the competition arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. The performance hall was packed, filled with parents, teachers, and students, all there to witness the music competition. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked to the stage. The piano gleamed under bright lights, and the air was thick with anticipation. I took a deep breath and sat down at the piano. The first few notes were shaky, uncertain. My fingers felt too stiff, my breath too shallow. I was trying too hard to impress, trying to live up to what they thought I should be. And just like that, I lost my rhythm. My mind raced as I stumbled through the next few measures, my hands missing the keys. The music that had once been fluid and effortless felt like an insurmountable wall. I was failing in front of them, failing in front of Ms. Harrison, the same woman who had told me I had potential, but now looked at me with a mixture of disdain and cold indifference. The audience shifted in their seats. I could feel their judgment hanging over me, but it wasn't their opinions that cut deepest. It was the way Ms. Harrison's eyes narrowed, the way she didn't flinch, didn't show a hint of concern. She had written me off the moment I faltered. I forced myself to finish the piece, each note heavier than the last. When I finally stopped, the silence was deafening. No applause, no recognition, just silence. I stood up quickly, avoiding the gaze of my classmates, the audience, even Ms. Harrison. I walked off the stage, the sting of failure seeping into every step I took. I didn't go back to my seat. Instead, I walked straight out of the hall, through the cold corridors, and into the empty courtyard. I found a bench and collapsed onto it, my hands trembling. I wanted to give up, to run, to leave the school and never look back. But then something unexpected happened. A soft voice broke through the fog of my thoughts. "You did great." I looked up, startled. It was Emily, one of the students who had always seemed to watch from the sidelines. She stood there, her expression genuine, not filled with pity like the others. She smiled softly, almost shyly. "You were incredible," she repeated. "I don't care what they think. You gave it everything." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her how much I appreciated it, how much I needed to hear it, but all I could do was nod. For the first time, I felt like someone saw me, not as Barron Trump, the son of a political family, not as the kid from nowhere, just as Barron, someone with a story to tell through music. And that was enough. But that feeling didn't last long. The next few days were a blur. Ms. Harrison's silence weighed heavily on me. She didn't acknowledge the mistake in class, didn't even look at me. I could feel the resentment simmering beneath her cold exterior. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about something else. Something I didn't understand. And then came the next challenge. The final performance in front of the entire school. This time it was different. This wasn't just about showing I could play. This was about showing I could rise, that I could overcome the self-doubt, the fear of failure, the pressure of perfection. This was a test, the one that would define me. I could either continue to let the weight of expectations crush me, or I could stand tall and play for the one person who mattered, myself. But as I prepared for the final performance, something shifted inside me. It wasn't about impressing them anymore. It was about proving to myself that I was more than just a name, more than just a mistake. The days after performance felt like walking through a fog. It wasn't the kind of fog that comes with a heavy storm or darkened skies. No, this fog was inside me, thick, suffocating, and seemingly endless. The failure at the competition was still fresh in my mind, a constant loop of missed notes and broken confidence. It was impossible to ignore, but more than that, it felt like a reflection of everything I had been trying to avoid. The moment I'd stepped on stage, I realized just how deep my fears went, how fragile my place here truly was. But the worst part wasn't the mistake itself. It was the aftermath, the way the students looked at me with pity, but no real sympathy. The way Ms. Harrison didn't even seem surprised. The way the entire room fell silent as I fumbled through a performance I thought I was prepared for. I sat at the piano the night after the competition, staring at the keys, unsure of how to begin. What was the point of practicing anymore? What did it matter if I could play perfectly when everything around me seemed to be falling apart? But then, like a small flame flickering in the dark, I remembered something. Emily's words, her kindness, when no one else had seemed to care. Maybe it was just a small gesture to her, but it was everything to me. I didn't want to be defined by my failure. I didn't want to let it become my story. I forced myself to play. My fingers felt stiff at first, hesitant, but slowly the music began to flow again. Not perfectly, but honestly. I poured everything I had into it. The frustration, the anger, the disappointment. Each note carried my doubt, but it also carried my resolve. I was going to fight back. Not for them. Not for Ms. Harrison. For myself. The next week, Ms. Harrison assigned us a new piece to work on, a composition by Beethoven. It was intricate, with rapid shifts in tempo and dynamics. Exactly the kind of piece that had always intimidated me. The class seemed eager to dive into it. The others were already practicing, their fingers flying over the keys with ease. And then there was me, sitting at the back, watching them. They looked so confident, so sure of themselves. I felt like an outsider again. Ms. Harrison didn't even acknowledge my presence. I felt the weight of her silence more than ever. She knew what I was capable of, but she was too caught up in her own disdain for me to care. But I wasn't going to let her decide my fate anymore. I spent every waking moment practicing. At first, it felt like I was fighting an uphill battle. My fingers stumbled over the keys, the tempo felt impossible to grasp, and the piece seemed too far out of my reach. But I refused to quit. Day after day, I worked through the mistakes, pushing myself to get it right. It wasn't easy. In fact, there were times I wanted to give up, to walk away from the piano and never look back. But then I remembered Emily's words, and something inside me stirred. She believed in me. That had to be enough for now. The following Friday, Ms. Harrison asked us to perform the piece in front of class. My stomach churned as I walked to the front of the room. I was still nervous, still unsure if I could do it. But as I sat at the piano, something felt different. I closed my eyes for a moment, allowing myself to breathe, to remember why I started this journey. I wasn't here to impress anyone. I wasn't here to gain approval. I was here because music was part of who I was, because I had a story to tell. I began to play. The first notes were uncertain, but as I went on, I found my rhythm. Each phrase became smoother. The music carried me forward. There were still moments of hesitation, but they were fewer now. The more I played, the more I felt in control of the piece. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. When I finished, I opened my eyes to find the class staring at me in silence. But this time, the silence wasn't cold. It wasn't filled with judgment. It was full of something else, something softer. It was respect. Ms. Harrison didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was less sharp, less dismissive. "Well, Mr. Trump," she said, her tone more neutral than usual. "That was better than I expected. Keep working at it." It wasn't much, but it was enough. As I walked back to my seat, I felt a small sense of pride settle in my chest. It wasn't about the praise. It wasn't about the approval. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above my mistakes, that I could keep moving forward, even when everything around me was trying to pull me down. That afternoon, as I walked to the hallways, something shifted in the way the students looked at me. The pity was gone, replaced by something else, something like curiosity. They didn't know what to make of me, but they were starting to see me for what I really was, a person who refused to give up, and that was a victory in itself. But the battle wasn't over. I knew that. This was just the beginning, and soon I would have to face the biggest challenge yet, one that would either break me or make me stronger. If you ever felt like you were being judged or dismissed before your time, we want to hear your story. How did you rise above it? If you believe in second chances and never giving up, join our community by subscribing to the channel. Together, we can support each other on this journey. And if this chapter inspired you, don't forget to like and share it with someone who needs to hear that their journey isn't over. The days leading up to the final performance felt like a storm building inside me, unstoppable, inevitable. Each note I played on the piano seemed to echo the pressure weighing on my shoulders. It wasn't just about proving myself anymore. It wasn't just about showing the class that I was capable. This time, it was about confronting my deepest fear, failure. And this time, it wasn't a small mistake I could brush off. It was everything. The recital was coming up, the one performance that would define me, not just in the eyes of Ms. Harrison or the students, but in my own eyes. I had spent weeks pouring every ounce of myself into the piece, practicing, adjusting, and pushing past every moment of doubt. But the closer I got to that day, the more the weight of it all became unbearable. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the audience, watching, waiting, judging. What if I failed again? What if I fell short just like I had before? The thought made my hands tremble. I could feel the sweat beginning to bead on my forehead as I sat at the piano in the practice room. I wasn't just practicing the notes anymore. I was trying to will myself into a state of certainty, into a place where I could say, I am enough. But I wasn't there yet, not even close. One afternoon, I decided to take a break from the piano and step outside for a walk. The air was crisp, the autumn leaves swirling in the wind. The school ground were quiet, almost peaceful. But there was something inside me, a voice telling me I wasn't done. I hadn't reached the end yet. This was just one more obstacle to overcome. I walked aimlessly, letting the rhythm of my steps drown out the chaos inside my head. That's when I spotted Emily sitting on a bench near the lake, her notebook open, writing. She didn't notice me at first, but when I stopped, she looked up and smiled. "Hey," she said, her voice soft. "How's the music going?" I shrugged, taking a seat next to her. "Not great," I admitted. "I feel like I'm losing control of it. The more I practice, the more it feels like I'm not going to be able to do it." She nodded thoughtfully, not offering empty platitudes or false reassurance. Instead, she said something that stopped me in my tracks. "You know," she began, her voice steady, "it's okay to be scared. It's okay to be afraid of failing. But if you don't give it your all, then you're already failing." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't the kind of motivation I was used to hearing. It wasn't the usual "you got this," or "don't worry, it'll be fine." It was raw, real, and it made me realize something I hadn't considered before. I had been so focused on the fear of failure that I hadn't fully embraced the fact that this was my chance to grow, to take risks, not just in front of the class, but within myself. What if I do fail? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She gave me a small smile. "Then you learn. You pick yourself up and you try again. The only real failure is giving up." I sat in silence, the weight of her words settling into my chest. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not now that I had come this far. The day of the performance arrived all too quickly. I stood backstage, my heart pounding in my chest. My palms were slick with sweat, my breath shallow and quick. The auditorium was filled with parents, students, and faculty, all watching, waiting, judging. But this time, I wasn't just nervous. I was prepared. I had worked for this moment. I had poured my soul into the music, and I wasn't going to let fear take that away from me. Ms. Harrison stood off to the side, her arms crossed, watching. I could see her studying me, her eyes narrowing slightly. but there was no more contempt in her gaze, no more judgment, just quiet expectation. I took a deep breath and walked onto stage, the spotlight blinding me for a moment. I sat at the piano, my fingers hovering above the keys, waiting. The silence in the room was thick, almost suffocating. But then something changed. I closed my eyes and remembered why I started this journey. I remembered that I wasn't doing this for anyone else. I was doing this for me. And then I began to play. The first few notes felt foreign at first. My fingers were stiff, unsure. But as I went on, the music started to flow. I could feel it, the connection between me and the piano. The piece wasn't just a series of notes anymore. It was an expression of everything I had learned, everything I had gone through, every challenge, every doubt, every victory. It was all in the music. And this time, I wasn't afraid. When I finished, the room was silent. But this silence was different. It wasn't judgment or disappointment. It was reverence. For the first time, I felt the audience truly listen, not to my mistakes, but to the music itself. I opened my eyes and saw the class, Ms. Harrison, and the audience all staring at me. The expression on Ms. Harrison's face was unreadable, but I could tell that she hadn't expected this. That was enough. The applause that followed was louder than I had imagined. It wasn't just for the music. It was for the journey I had taken to get there, for the growth, the pain, the overcoming. The applause wasn't just for a performance. It was for the person I had become. But as I stood there, taking in the moment, something inside me told me this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I had proven something to myself, but I knew there was more to come. The real challenge was ahead, and I was ready. But as the applause faded, I knew that my journey wasn't over. There was still more I had to prove, more I had to do, and this time, I wasn't going to let anything stop me. The final curtain was drawing near. The stage had already been set, and the audience was in their seats, eagerly awaiting the last performance. This was it, the last chance to prove that everything I had fought for had led to something meaningful. I stood backstage, heart racing. The sound of the crowd seeped through the thick walls, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered but the music. Nothing mattered but what I had become. A few months ago, I was unsure of who I was, unsure where I fit in. But now I knew. It wasn't just about the piano anymore. It wasn't just about the applause, or the approval of Ms. Harrison, or the whispers of my classmates. It was about my voice, my identity, my truth. But standing there, I realized how far I had come, how many layers I had shed. The fear that once gripped me was nowhere to be found. This was no longer a test of my talent. It was a test of who I had become in the face of adversity. I took one last deep breath, feeling the coolness of the air around me. The audience was waiting, but I was no longer nervous. I knew what I had to do. I walked onto the stage, each step steady, my mind focused. The spotlight was blinding, but it didn't matter. The piano before me was my canvas, and I was ready to paint my masterpiece. I sat down at the piano, the familiar weight of the keys beneath my fingers. For a moment, I let the silence settle in. The room was quiet, and I could feel the expectation in the air. But I wasn't concerned with expectations anymore. I was concerned with delivering the best performance of my life. As my fingers touched the keys, a wave of clarity washed over me. This wasn't about impressing anyone. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about expressing who I was. The emotions that had been building inside me for so long now found their outlet in the music. The notes poured from me, flowing freely, as if they had been waiting to be unleashed. The piece I was playing wasn't easy. It required precision, emotion, and depth. But I no longer feared making a mistake. Every note I played carried a part of me. The struggles, the doubts, the triumphs. The music was more than a performance. It was a declaration. I glanced up briefly, catching a glimpse of the audience. I saw Emily sitting at the front, her eyes focused on me, a quiet smile playing at her lips. She had believed in me from the start, and for the first time, I believed in myself. The sound of the piano filled the room, reverberating through the walls, and I lost myself in it. Each chord, each phrase, carried me further into the moment. I was no longer thinking about the past or the future. I was living in the now, immersed in the music. It was the purest form of freedom I had ever known. When I finally reached the last note, I felt a rush of relief and satisfaction. The audience sat in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on me. But this time, the silence wasn't filled with judgment or doubt. It was filled with something else: respect, admiration, acknowledgement. As the last note echoed in the room, I opened my eyes and took in the scene before me. The applause that followed was overwhelming. It wasn't just the sound of clapping hands. It was the sound of acceptance, the sound of recognition, the sound of victory. I stood up, my heart racing, my chest swelling with a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about the applause. It was about the journey I had taken to get here, the obstacles I had faced, the doubts I had silenced. I wasn't the same person who had walked into this school months ago. I had found my voice, my place. As I left the stage, I noticed Ms. Harrison standing at the side. She didn't approach me immediately, but when she did, her expression had changed. It was no longer cold or indifferent. There was a flicker of something else, something that almost looked like pride. "Well done, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice softer than it had ever been. "You've proven that you have more than just talent. You have heart." Those words, those simple words, meant more than I could ever explain. I had earned her respect, but more importantly, I had earned my own. I walked off the stage, my head held high. The world around me seemed different now. The air felt lighter. The burden of expectation had been replaced by something else, a quiet confidence. I knew who I was now. I knew what I could do, and I was ready for whatever came next. But as I stood there, looking out at the audience, I knew that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something greater. The path ahead was unknown, but I was ready to walk it with my head held high. Has there been a moment in your life when you found the strength to rise above doubt and fear? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story could inspire someone else today. If you believe in the power of transformation, subscribe to our community and stay connected for more inspiring stories. Together, we rise. The days following performance were a blur. The applause still echoed in my ears, but the feeling it gave me was fading, replaced by a creeping unease. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure what was next. It was as though I had reached a peak, but the view beyond was shrouded in fog. What now? I spent the next few weeks walking the halls of Madison Elite High School, no longer the outsider I once was, but still not fully at ease. I had proven myself musically, yes, but that didn't mean the whispers had stopped. It didn't mean the people who had dismissed me before suddenly accepted me with open arms. There were still glances, still whispers behind my back, but this time they didn't bother me. In fact, they only made me more determined to push forward. I couldn't afford to dwell on their judgment. Not now, not when I had come so far. But with that determination came another realization. I was still holding something back. I wasn't just afraid of the judgment of others anymore. I was afraid of what was happening inside of me. I had proved that I could play, that I had talent. But had I truly overcome my fear? Had I really become the person I wanted to be? The self-doubt lingered. It gnawed at me in the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts. It was a fear that no matter how much I changed, I would always be defined by who I was before, by my name, by my past, by the weight of everything I had tried to escape. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let fear continue to dictate my life. That night, after another long day of practice, I found myself back at the piano. It was late, too late for any of the other students to be in the practice rooms. But I needed this. I needed the music to drown out the uncertainty, to drown out the fear. As my fingers touched the keys, something shifted within me. It wasn't just about playing anymore. It wasn't about impressing anyone or proving my worth. It was about something deeper, something more personal. The music had always been a way for me to express what I couldn't say. But now, it was a way for me to confront what I had been running from. I played the piece again, this time not as a performance, but as a confession. Each note felt like a step towards something greater, something more profound. I wasn't trying to show anyone what I could do. I was showing myself what I was capable of. I was facing my fear head on, refusing to let it control me anymore. As I finished the piece, a sense of clarity washed over me. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about pleasing anyone. It was about finding peace in my own heart. And in that moment, I realized that I had already overcome the hardest part of this journey. The fear that had once consumed me wasn't gone, but it no longer had the power to define me. I had found my voice, not just in the music, but in myself. The next day, I walked into class with a newfound sense of purpose. Ms. Harrison was there, as usual, standing at the front of the room, her arms crossed, her gaze as cold as ever. But this time, I didn't feel small in her presence. I didn't feel like I had to prove myself anymore. When the class began, she turned her attention to me for the first time in days. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "I've been thinking about your performance." It was unexpected. I held my breath, unsure of what was coming next. Had she changed her mind? Was she going to dismiss it as a fluke? But then she surprised me. "You've grown," she said. "I can see it now. You have the talent." "Yes, but now you have the heart. Keep going. Don't let anyone stop you." Her words were a small victory, but they meant more to me than anything else she could have said. She had never been one to offer compliments, and for her to admit that I had changed, that I had finally earned her respect, felt like a triumph. As I sat back down at the piano later that day, I felt lighter. I wasn't carrying the same weight that I had when I first arrived at Madison Elite. The judgment, the expectations, the pressure, they didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had found my way. I had faced my fears, and I had come out on the other side stronger. But I wasn't done yet. The final performance loomed ahead, and with it, the chance to prove that this journey wasn't just a one-time thing. It wasn't about a single performance or a single moment of triumph. It was about the person I had become and the person I was still becoming. I wasn't done growing. I wasn't done proving to myself that I could rise above the challenges, that I could face the doubts and fears and come out on top. And as I looked ahead, I knew that the road to redemption was still just beginning. But even as I felt a sense of peace, I knew the hardest test was still to come. The final performance was not just about proving myself to others. It was about proving to myself that I could truly rise above everything that had held me back. The final performance was upon me. It felt like everything I had done in the past months had led to this moment. The music, the practice, the doubts, the triumphs. This was a culmination of it all. But despite everything, there was still a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't ready. That no matter how hard I tried, I was still not enough. I spent the days leading up to the recital practicing with an intensity one hadn't known I was capable of. Every note I played felt like a step closer to something greater, yet the pressure weighed heavily on me. I had proven myself once before, but this time felt different. This time, I wasn't just playing for an audience. I wasn't playing for Ms. Harrison or my classmates. This time, I was playing for myself. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It wasn't about the applause or the validation. It was about confronting the doubts I had been carrying for so long and proving to myself that I could do this, that I could stand tall and face whatever came my way, no matter how difficult it might be. The day of the recital, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Parents and students filled the seats, their eyes eager, their expectations high. The spotlight burned brightly on the stage, casting everything else into shadow. I could hear the murmurs, the soft chatter, the subtle whispers of expectation. But this time it didn't scare me. It didn't make me falter. I stood backstage, trying to control my breathing, trying to calm the storm that raged inside me. Emily had texted me earlier, telling me to trust myself, to remember who I had become. But it wasn't her words that I clung to. It was something deeper, something I had found within myself. The realization that I wasn't defined by the mistakes I had made or the judgment others had cast upon me. I was defined by my resilience, my willingness to keep moving forward, no matter how many times I fell. As I stepped onto the stage, my hands didn't tremble. My heart didn't race. I wasn't nervous anymore. I was ready to show the world, but more importantly, to show myself what I was capable of. I sat at the piano, and closed my eyes for a moment. The room was silent. The weight of the moment was suffocating, but I refused to let it crush me. I took a deep breath and began to play. The first few notes were familiar. They weren't perfect, but they were mine. I had worked hard for every note I played, and as the music flowed from my fingers, I felt a connection to something greater than myself. It wasn't just about hitting the right notes or playing the piece flawlessly. It was about expressing everything I had learned, everything I had fought for. The mistakes, the growth, the pain, it was all in the music. I played to the piece, my fingers dancing across the keys, the music swelling and receding like the tides. The audience sat in complete silence, their eyes fixed on me. But I didn't see them. I didn't hear them. All I heard was the music. All I felt was a rhythm that pulsed through my body. By the time I reached the final chords, I knew this performance had been different. I had given everything I had. I had proven something to myself. When I finished, the silence that followed was deafening. I opened my eyes, unsure what I would find. And then, slowly, the applause began. It wasn't thunderous or wild, but it was genuine, respectful. I could feel the weight of it, and I could feel the change that had taken place in the room. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about the journey I had taken to get here. It was about the person I had become. It was about the strength I had discovered in myself. I stood up, my legs trembling slightly as I bowed. I didn't look for validation. I didn't need it anymore. I had already given myself everything I needed. I had proven to myself that I was capable of more than I ever thought possible. As I walked off the stage, I caught a glimpse of Ms. Harrison. She was standing at the side, her arms crossed, but there was something different in her expression. It wasn't praise, but it wasn't indifference either. It was acknowledgement, and for the first time, I felt like I had earned it. "Mr. Trump," she said as I passed, her voice more measured than usual. That was unexpected. "You've changed." I nodded, not needing to say anything in return. Her words were enough. She had seen the change, too. The rest of the day passed in a blur of congratulatory remarks, but I barely noticed them. I wasn't focused on what anyone else thought anymore. What mattered was that I had faced my fear, I had faced the doubts, and I had risen above them. The journey wasn't over, but this chapter had ended. As I walked through the halls, I noticed something had shifted. The students who had once looked at me with pity or scorn now regarded me with respect. They didn't see me as the outsider anymore. They saw me as someone who had fought for his place. And for the first time in my life, I saw it too. I belonged here. But as the applause faded, I realized this wasn't the end of my journey. It was just the beginning of something far greater. I had overcome my fears, but now I had to prove that I was ready for what was coming next. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to prove yourself against all odds? How did you rise above? If you believe in the power of perseverance and change, join our community by subscribing to the channel. Let's keep pushing forward together. If this chapter resonated with you, like and share it with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to change. The last few weeks have been a whirlwind of rehearsals, doubts, and moments of growth. I had come so far from the boy who had walked into Madison Elite High School, unsure of himself, afraid of what others thought. But now, as the final test loomed before me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment that would either solidify everything I had worked for or unravel it all. I had been working harder than ever, practicing late into the night, pushing myself beyond what I thought were my limits. But something still gnawed at me, something deeper than nerves. I wasn't just worried about my performance. I was worried about how I would feel once it was all over. What would be left of me when the applause faded? What would I have accomplished, really, if I couldn't look at myself and say, "I've truly changed"? The recital was only days away, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was truly ready. Was I strong enough to face what was coming? Was I prepared for the possibility that it might not go perfectly? I had come to understand that perfection didn't matter, but it was hard not to feel the weight of expectation. Ms. Harrison, the students, my classmates, they all had their eyes on me now. I wasn't just the new kid anymore. I was the one who had overcome the odds, the one who had silenced the whispers. But in doing so, I had set myself up for something bigger. Now, it wasn't just about proving I could play music. It was about proving I could handle whatever came next. The night before the recital, I found myself alone in the practice room. The only light in the room was from the soft glow of the lamp above the piano. The silence was suffocating, but it wasn't the kind of silence I was used to. This time, it felt different. It felt like the calm before a storm. As I sat at the piano, my fingers hovered over the keys. I closed my eyes, trying to center myself, trying to push away the fear and doubt that threatened to overwhelm me. But it wasn't easy. The pressure was real. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. I began to play, the first note soft, hesitant, but as the music filled the room, I felt a shift inside me. The tension that had been building inside me slowly began to fade. The more I played, the more I let go. I wasn't thinking about the audience or the performance anymore. I wasn't thinking about Ms. Harrison or the students who had once doubted me. I was thinking about the music, about the story I wanted to tell, about the person I had become. And then it hit me, the music was more than just a performance. It was my story, my truth. Every note, every chord was a reflection of the struggle I had faced. The doubt, the fear, the uncertainty, all of it had led me to this moment. I had faced my demons, and I had come out stronger. This performance wasn't about impressing anyone or winning approval. It was about showing the world and myself that I was ready to take my place in it. The final note rang out, and for a moment, everything was still. The weight in my chest lifted, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. I opened my eyes and looked at the piano, the silence around me now comforting instead of suffocating. I stood up, my heart still racing, but this time with excitement instead of fear. I wasn't done yet. The recital wasn't just a test of my musical ability. It was a final test of my character, my journey. This was the moment I had been preparing for, not just as a musician, but as a person. The next evening, I walked into the auditorium, my palms clammy with nervous energy. The room was packed. The lights were blinding. But as I walked to the piano, I felt a calmness settle over me. This wasn't just a performance. This was me, standing on the precipice of something bigger than myself. I wasn't just performing for them. I was performing for me. I sat down at the piano, my fingers poised above the keys. The silence was deafening, but I welcomed it. It was my moment, my time to show everyone, but more importantly, to show myself that I was ready. The first few notes were slow, deliberate. I could feel the weight of every eye on me, but it didn't matter. I played with everything I had. The music became a release, a way to shed the fears, the doubts, the insecurities. The piece I had chosen was challenging, but it was mine. It was my voice, my story, and I wasn't holding back. The performance flowed naturally, each note building upon the last. The tension in my chest melted away, replaced by the pure joy of playing. I wasn't worried about hitting every note perfectly. I was focused on making the music feel real, feel alive. It was no longer just about the performance. It was about the expression, the release, the culmination of everything I had gone through. When I finished, the silence that followed was deafening. I opened my eyes, unsure what I would find. But when the applause began, it was unlike anything I had experienced before. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was genuine, respectful, earned. I stood up, my legs shaking, my heart pounding, but this time with pride. I had done it. I had faced the fear, the doubt, and I had overcome it. I had proven not just to the world, but to myself that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined. But as the applause faded, I realized the journey wasn't over. This performance was only the beginning of something bigger. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was no longer afraid to walk it. The days after the recital were a blur of congratulatory remarks, but they felt different this time. I was no longer the boy who walked into Madison Elite High School, full of doubt, fear, and uncertainty. I had become something more, a person who had learned to rise above the expectations, above the fears, and above the shadows that had once defined me. But even as the praises poured in, a part of me knew this wasn't the end. I had proven my worth musically, yes, but there was more to this journey, than just one performance. The real test was yet to come. How would I handle success? How would I cope with what came after the applause faded? I spent the following days reflecting on everything that had led me to this point. The struggles, the humiliations, the moments of doubt, they hadn't been in vain. Each obstacle had shaped me. Each challenge had made me stronger. And yet, I knew there was still something else, something deeper that needed to be confronted. It wasn't just about proving myself to others anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could keep moving forward, that I could face whatever came next with the same resolve I had used to face the darkest moments of my journey. The true test wasn't how well I played on stage. It was how I would face the future, the unknown. The next morning, I walked into the school with a newfound sense of purpose. I wasn't looking for validation anymore. I wasn't hoping for approval or recognition. What mattered now was that I had found peace within myself, and that, more than any applause or accolade, was the greatest achievement I could have hoped for. As I walked through the hallways, I noticed something had shifted. The students who had once ignored me now greeted me with nods of respect. The whispers behind my back had faded into silence. But more importantly, I felt different. I no longer sought their approval. I no longer needed to prove anything. I had earned my place, not just in this school, but in my own life. Later that day, I found myself in Ms. Harrison's class once again. She had been distant for weeks, hardly acknowledging my presence after the recital. But today, as I walked into the room, she looked at me differently. There was something in her gaze, something almost human. It was as if she saw me, not just as a student or a challenge, but as a person. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "You've come a long way. And I must admit, I didn't think you had it in you." I wasn't looking for praise, but hearing her words felt like a quiet validation. I had earned her respect, not with my talent alone, but with my determination. I had shown her and myself that I was more than a boy who had walked into the school full of insecurities. "You've proved something to me, Barron," she continued. "You've shown me that there's more to success than just talent. It's about perseverance, heart, and the willingness to keep pushing forward, no matter what." Her words were more than I had ever expected from her. I nodded, not knowing what to say in return. It wasn't about hearing her acknowledgement. It was about knowing that I had earned it, and that was enough. As the days passed, I continued to practice, to grow, to evolve. But this time, it wasn't just about the piano. It was about every decision I made, every step I took. I was no longer defined by my past or my mistakes. I was defined by my resilience, my ability to keep moving forward, no matter the obstacles. And as I walked into the final performance of the semester, I felt a calmness wash over me. The auditorium was filled with people once again, but this time I wasn't anxious. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. I had already proven everything I needed to prove. The music was no longer a test of my ability. It was a reflection of who I had become. The spotlight on the stage was bright, but it didn't dazzle me. It didn't intimidate me. I had already conquered the hardest battle, the battle within myself. This performance was just another chapter, another step in the journey. I wasn't doing it for the applause. I wasn't doing it for anyone but me. I sat at the piano, my fingers brushing the keys, and as the first note filled the room, I knew that everything had changed. Not because I was playing for the audience, but because I was playing for myself. I wasn't looking for approval. I wasn't seeking validation. I was expressing who I had become. The music swelled, and for the first time, I didn't care how it sounded. I didn't care about the critics or the whispers. I only cared about the truth that was pouring from my heart through every note. I was free. When the final note echoed through the room, the applause came, but it felt different this time. It wasn't just applause, it was recognition. Recognition of everything I had overcome, everything I had become. And as I stood there, I knew that this was only the beginning. This performance wasn't the end of my journey. It was the start of something even greater. The road ahead was still unknown, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to walk it. If you believe in the power of perseverance and transformation, join our community. Subscribe and stay inspired by more stories of resilience and triumph. If this chapter resonated with you, Like and share with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to rise above.